There's a lot of.
And
Remember what she told him.
All right, well, welcome here, everybody. Today's July 26, 2008. Say that for the posterity for the camera, and just want to welcome everybody here. Kind of a fun event to put together, part of our celebration of the 40 years of Pioneer Days here in Milford, and really thank everybody for coming out. We have a real treat to have Aubrey LaFoy and Jerry Clark, two of the best historians that I know of here in the area, and a lot more historians here. So we're going to be hearing from Aubrey and Jerry, and then look to have some discussion, or at least other people to come up. So if you have a favorite story of Milford, a piece of history you'd like to share, we would ask that you come forward and use the microphone. For one, so everybody can hear, and two, so we can be sure and get it on the video. And I had a number of calls over the last couple weeks from people who are out of town, but had heard about this event and really wanted to catch the video. So we're going to be selling the video for $10, and hey, inflation. So just, if you're interested in one, I'll have a sign up here, and we'll be sure and get you a video. So with that, I'll hand it over.
Thank you for coming. I'm Aubrey LaFoy, and I might tell you that I didn't plan on being a historian for Dixon County, but some things like that just happened. In 1992, Milford had a centennial, right?
That's right.
Okay. Anyway, Doris Hemphill had been writing some articles about the history of Milford, and I met her on the street one day, and she said, "Well, you're a historian, you've been teaching history, and you know a lot about Milford." I said, "Well, I know a few things about Milford." She said, "Why don't you write some articles?"
we all get a room.
And I said, "Well, sure, I'll write some articles." So I wrote a couple, and then centennial was all over with. And the two young ladies who were running the Milford Mail at that time says, "Why don't you keep writing?" Well, that was in 1992. And I've been writing an article practically every week since 1992, and here it is 2008. So that, I added them up the other day, and that makes over 800 articles I've written. And somebody said, "Do you always tell the truth?" I said, "I try. Once in a while I get caught." But, you know, what the truth is, it can kind of just, you spread it around a little bit. But anyway, today I'm going to talk to you a bit here and tell a story or two, and then Jerry's going to take over and he'll tell you a little bit about the history of Milford, right? Jerry? Okay. Anyway, I grew up in Milford. I was born here in 1925, so I've lived in and around Milford for 83 years. And let me say one thing about Milford. Milford is kind of unique in a way because we have the lake up here. Now, you can go down to Peterson, and you can go to a lot of other places, and they're nice towns, and they have a good history too, but we have the lake up here, and early on, most of us had some association with the lake. And so consequently, you know, I think it was a great little town to grow up in, and like most kids, I could hardly wait to get away from Milford. I graduated from Milford in 1943. And I could hardly wait to get away. Well, Uncle Sam gave me that opportunity. Fact is, I was in there for 30 months. I was in China, Burma, and India in World War II, and by the time I got back home, I'd been clear around the world. So I went north out of Milford in August of 1943, and then in January of 46, I came up from Spencer, and I completed the whole circuit. But anyway, that's enough about me. Now, we like some good stories, but if you will, don't dig up any old ghosts or anything like that. We all have, right, Virgil?
Right.
No, you're okay. Anyway, I'm going to just start out with a kind of a little story that I didn't realize until I was started writing and so on like that. That Milford had a pool hall. Anybody know where the old pool hall was? Where was it?
It was right where the furniture store was.
Right.
I guess that furniture.
Right. they've changed it a little bit, but when I was a kid, the pool hall, I didn't realize this at all, but it was the employment agency for Milford. Now, you can laugh, but that's true what it was. I remember my grandfather, Ed LaFoy, I didn't find out till I was 65 years old that he couldn't read or write. You know, that's something. But anyway, he was down there a lot of times, and some people would chastise me, what are you doing down in the pool hall? I said, well, my granddad's down there. I go down and sit with him and watch the guys shoot pool and so on like that. Well, I didn't realize later on until that if the farmer wanted somebody to do a little work, or somebody wanted a ditch dug, or they wanted a stump removed, or something like that, that's where he found somebody to do the job. You come down to the pool hall. Anyway, if some of you remember, in a nice sunny day or a cool day, on the front side there was a big window right in front of the bar there, but it was a kind of a ledge. Remember that? And the old coach used to, oh, my age probably, they'd sit there and talk, you know. And, you know, I wish I had a recorder of some of the stories that those guys were telling. But anyway, every so often, I think they seeded it. But anyway, there's a big grate there because below there, they had a bowling alley. And they had windows to get money in there. Anyway, every so often, as the kids would walk along there, they looked down and they'd see some money. Well, now back in the 30s and so on, a dime or a quarter or a nickel were worth a lot. Some of you know what I'm talking about. Anyway, they would see that, and then they would look down there through the grate, and they'd see a quarter down there. And, you know, they could think of all the ways in the world how to get that quarter out of there. And some of them finally figured out they got a bamboo pole, stuck some gum on the end of it, and stuck down there, and then they could retrieve that quarter. Now, that's one of the little stories I remember from my childhood, and like that and so on. I said, I can remember when they put paving through Milford. I can also remember when they used to have at the four corners there, used to have a Christmas tree. Remember that? Right out in the middle of the street. Can you imagine Dave putting a Christmas tree out in the middle of the street in 71 there? And not very often. But anyway, that's maybe the kind of stories we'd like to have. Some of you can recall. And you know, as I write, people ask me, where do you get your articles? Where do you get the information? I said, you know, I can pick out anybody in here, and everybody has a story. Some are good, some are better, and then there's him. So, Jerry, why don't you come up here and you can tell them a little bit about history of Milford.
Well, I think everyone in here knows basically who I am, Jerry Clark. We have the Clark Museum over here.
We can't hear you.
Somebody must have turned that off on you.
I didn't turn it off. I just talk it, hold it up right here and talk that, like that.
All right.
Don't swallow it.
Okay. I guess everyone knows that Irene, my wife, and I, we have the Clark Museum over here. And history is real important to me, not just from Milford, but in the last year, we are going to expand our museum to the whole state of Iowa. We're not going to have pictures of every town that was in Iowa, but believe me, every county is going to be well represented between pictures and business advertisements. Well, to get back to our town of Milford, of course, most people here know that our town of Milford really started down in what we later called the Old Town, which was Milford, just a short southeast area of our present town. And the town started down there because of a mill, a flour mill and a sawmill around 1870. And the mill did very good for after it was built, but there were certain events that happened into the area in the early 1870s. money panics, and there was a time when grasshoppers just simply ate all the crops up, and the mills had no business at all. And so there was a few years there that the mill wasn't even operating. But when it was, people as far as 50 miles away would come to have their grain made into flour or whatever. And there was enough business down there that there was actually 2 hotels, general stores, an early doctor by the name of Beers was down there, and a few homes and stuff. And as the mill kind of took its toll, so to speak, then the railroad came from Spencer. And by the way, we were kind of late getting the railroad up in through Dixon County, our area. A lot of people never realize that most railroads, when they come through town, most people think, you know, that was a big government giveaway. They just simply give the ground to the railroad and they built their tracks through. Well, basically through Nebraska, states like Wyoming and stuff, that was a big deal. But most all the railroads, like the one that come up through Spencer, people had to vote to actually see if they wanted a railroad. And we would have had a railroad earlier into Milford if the people from northern Clay County would have voted for it. But anyway, we did get it. And when the railroad did come through, well, a lot of the businesses down in the old town of Milford moved up, couple of the hotels, they moved the buildings from Old Town up into our Main Street area now. And when you think of it, back then, I just can't imagine how they moved a lot of that stuff, because it had all been by horses, and it had to be some pretty good engineering, smart guys to do that. Even some of the older homes in Milford, not too many, are from the old town of Milford. And of course, I've always been a firm believer that with history, it isn't really who started what first or whatever. I always think of every business that has been in Milford has been important. I mean, one business isn't any better than another business. Whether you run the blacksmith shop, you were a doctor, you run the pool hall, or what. Everybody kind of made town what it is. And what's nice, and what I've tried to do in our museum, is keep people's names in remembrance. Not just, of course, I got 1,404 pictures in our museum now with stories written about, and most of them have got people's names on. And I just love people's names because they were important to the town. And like our town of Milford now, all you people, you remember who run the grocery store, who run the drugstore, but maybe the next person sitting beside you, well, maybe it was just a little earlier time, and they don't recall them, but they recall who happened to be there during their experience in the town. And one thing I have glad that we did do in our centennial book is put all the older home pictures in of Milford. And Irene, my wife, took the pictures of what we felt were the older homes. And then I went and I read every abstract, almost 200 pictures of homes in the town. I read every one of them abstracts, and I put the first person that owned a house probably had it built up till we had our centennial. It took a lot of time to do that, but if you look through that book, it's amazing. There's a few houses gone since 1992 out of Milford. And of course, look at what's been built. It's unbelievable, you know. But times are always changing, and I always think of my experience growing up in Milford. I always said I might have been one of the rowdy ones in my class. I sometimes have to think how I come about doing what I've done with the museum and everything. I've always said, if my old school teachers could just see me now. But I enjoy the history, and I think of several different things. I always think, you know, we kind of are in a time period now where maybe things doesn't actually look the best, you know, with home sales and got high-priced gasoline and everything. But I always think of Dwight Antista, and I always think of him. Dwight was, I always figured, one of the sharp guys in Milford. He was a good businessman and a nice guy to visit with. And I always think of him telling me when he was a little kid, he would go in the blacksmith shop one time with his father. And he said the guys were all sitting around the potbelly stove talking about, boy, things are bad out here. Things just can't keep going this way. And Dwight says, you know, Jerry, people are still talking that way. Things just can't keep going that way, but things are still going, you know. And I also remember, you think of little certain events that happen, like Woody's Cafe that used to be by Jacob's grocery store. And I think of Roy Whitrock and S.I. Russell, our banker, would go in there and maybe have their coffee or whatever. I always think of my dad. Once in a while, Mr. Russell, he would have a roll or something like that with his coffee. And of course, most people know Mr. Russell was a pretty conservative banker, but a very nice gentleman. And Dad would say, gee, he'd see that roll, he'd say, boy, Mr. Russell, you're eating pretty high on the hog there today, aren't you? But, and then I always think of going in the cafe there, Roy Whitrock was in there every morning. And of course, most everyone remember Roy, what a nice guy he was. And when he had the gas station, and he'd be sitting in there, and pretty soon old Ralph Bergen would come in. And old Roy would say, well, gee whiz, here comes old Bergie. He says, what did you do, find a dime in someone's pants pocket? But you know, growing up, you think of just different things that people say, and like Audrey said, that Milford has been a real nice area to live in. I think everyone in here would say that we're real fortunate to have been born or got to live in an area so close to the lake. And our town is prospering, where so many of them, you know, a lot of towns, you just go 9-10 miles away, they don't even have a cafe for older people that hardly enjoy a coffee break or what. But we hang in there, and we will keep prospering. Well, that's about it, Audrey, and thank you for having me.
Good. That's just a preliminary. Now we'd like to have some few people, if you can, to come up and give us a little story. There's one, always, here's Virgil and Lauren. I just wish this video camera I was a kid, I worked at the print shop in Milford, and they had a back window there that went down the basement. And I remember looking out that window and watching your dad put together those wagon wheels with deal like that. Emmett can tell you how to do it. And you know, I always think, you know, that's an art that's just gone, isn't it, Emmett? I mean, there's a guy right here that knows how to do that, but there aren't many of them around anymore that can put those wagon wheels and the big rim and all that. But I remember you had a fire out there, and you know, it was kind of interesting. Okay, Ted, you want to tell us about the candy or the ice cream bar or something like that?
That isn't too old, though.
Oh, well,
It's been a few years.
well, everybody has to have one when they come up here.
I always think about you talking about Woody. I remember one time Woody in the cafe, that was Paulie's old cafe. I remember Woody, one day he had Chaffin, I think some of you knew, and Sylvia's dad were sitting there having coffee, and they were kind of joking around, and Woody had a kind of cough he had. He could cough from his cigarette smoking or something he had. Anyway, Ed was gonna, or Jordan was gonna, I don't know, one of the other was gonna pay for the other guy's lunch anyway. They had a piece of pie, I think. And Woody started coughing, and oh, yeah, he coughed and coughed and coughed. And Ed got up to leave, and Sylvia's dad says, you know, I think if we wait long enough, I think he's gonna die. You won't have to pay for it anyway. But he finally straightened out. Of course, another one in town was, you haven't mentioned yet, was Sid Guest.
Oh, Sid, yeah, okay.
That was quite a place down at Sid's mechanic shop. It was just a little bit to the north of the cafe.
Isn't that where Bib here?
Yeah.
Isn't that where,
That's where our office.
that's where Bib's office is today?
Yeah. Okay. I always remember they telling about, the guys used to all sit around on nail kegs in there and doing a lot of talking, and Simon Van Noort was our city policeman. And Simon was a pretty good policeman, all right. But anyway, him and Sid got into a fight there argument anyway. And Sid got pretty mad, and he reached over and got a hold of a great big wrench off the bench, and he drew back with that wrench, and Simon says, what you gonna do with that? Simon unholstered his gun and pulled it out. Sid says, what are you gonna do with that? He says, depends on what you're gonna do with that wrench.
What's nice about those stories, remember Sid Guest, remember had a wrecking truck, one of the few, and we lived right up on Terrace Park up here. The sand down there is really nice, you know. And that was the days before they put in a lot of ramps. And we would sit up there in our cottage and we'd watch people, and they would come in, they were gonna launch their boat. And then we'd say, well, you know, we just kind of wait, you know. Pretty soon they'd launch their boat, and then they'd start up and, you know, down they'd go on the sand. And then they'd work, they'd get planks and everything. Finally, you know, after a while I'd go out and I said, do you want me to give you some help? And I said, well, yeah, we sure would. I said, okay, I'll have a fella down here in about 15 minutes, so I give Sid a call, and he'd come up and pull him out of the sand, because that was the only way you're gonna get him out of that sand down there. So, okay, somebody else?
Why don't you mention Coleman, the old policeman?
Stanley? Okay. Anybody got any good story about Stanley? How about his son Chesty?
I just think it was interesting, we had one policeman and he was how old?
Come on up here.
I don't know a whole lot of history about Milford, but I've lived here for 52 years. It doesn't seem possible. But to me, it was interesting that we had this policeman, and how old do you suppose he was? 60, 70?
Maybe 50s, yeah, 50s.
Well, he was quite old, and I thought, one policeman to do all of this, and now look how many we've got. But he was quite a character, as I remember. Bud talked about him a lot. But I think he needs to be mentioned because times have sure changed.
And yeah.
I have a story.
Maybe share your name with us.
Pat Arndt, it was Pat Morris, and the board was Bill and Tilly were my grandparents. And they lived in Old Town. And I thought this was so weird, I've thought about it since. This was before welfare. This was in the 40s, probably the early 40s. And there was an old hotel there that was left, I think, from when they had the mill there. And it sat empty for years, just abandoned. And I can remember a widow that didn't have any money moved in with her children and lived there for a while. That wouldn't happen today, and she'd probably have welfare to support her. And I grew up on a farm near Spencer. And so I knew all about sweet corn. You know, we loved it. But they were out picking field corn one time, the children of this widow that were sort of living in this abandoned hotel. And I remember thinking, you can eat field corn? Never had heard of it. And today that just wouldn't happen. We used to play in that hotel. We'd run around, and it was like it was haunted, and we just had the best time in that hotel. And then they eventually did move it up by Arnold's Park. But we had a lot of good times in Old Town. We used to go fishing down there, and there'd just be mobs of people down there fishing. So we just had a lot of good memories of Old Town.
That's the old green mill.
Thank you.
It was right by the old green
Yeah,
mill.
I bought the green mill, didn't it?
No,
No.
that burned down. This was an
Yeah.
old hotel that sat right by the green mill.
The Green Mill Tavern burned down, but the Green Mill, the gas station, was moved over here to the south part of Milford by the Bevers.
Yeah,
And
that-
had a gas station for it.
That was,
That was across the street, right on the curb. I
Yeah,
remember it as
okay.
a child too.
You're talking about the town of Milford, I think about, in 1930s, my dad and grandfather and uncle had a butcher shop, about where the hardware store is today. And anyway, they were nice guys, and people would come in and say, and there was Ray Nickel and Ray LaFoy, and they'd say, we're a little short, can you give us some credit? Well, pretty soon they had a whole bunch of these little books with credit on the thing, but they couldn't pay their bills, so it went belly up. So my dad was without a job there for a few years. And he finally, in I think 1933, and if anybody remember the mayor we used to have by the name of E.E. Hellridge, remember him? Very, very dignified individual. Anyway, Dad started working for the town of Milford, and he got $70 a month, and he was the chief of police, the street commissioner, swept out the city hall, the jailer, took care of the dump, and was a dog catcher. Outside of that, he didn't have anything to do. You know? And the only other employees the city of Milford had was the city clerk, who was my mother. And I can remember as a kid many times, mother was doing the book work for the city with the big book laid out on the kitchen table. And she got $20 a month for that job. And then they had, Bernard was the night marshal. And then there was 3 fellows that worked for the light and the water plant. With Barney Burris, who's the others?
Bunch Tarrington,
Bunch Tarrington, and who's the other?
Frank Morgan.